Hey guys, welcome to a new video. So आज के वीडियो में हम बात करेंगे FSR के बारे में. FSR रिलीज हो चुका है. By the way, it's AMD Fidelity Super Resolution, the direct competitor to DLSS. So stay tuned, watch till the end. Deep learning super sampling. Deep learning super sampling is DLSS. Wow, simple हो गया काम. Before we talk about DLSS and FSR, उसके बीच का अंतर समझने से पहले हमने ये समझना पड़ेगा कि व्हाट इज सुपर सैम्पलिंग इन जनरल. सो लेट्स स्टार्ट ऑफ विद दैट. सुपर सैम्पलिंग क्या होता है? नाउ टू एक्सप्लेन इट वेरी वेरी सिंपली, सिंपल एक्सप्लेनेशन होगा तो सुपर सैम्पलिंग इज नथिंग बट आपका ग्राफिक कार्ड एक हायर रेजोल्यूशन फ्रेम रेंडर कर रहा है और उसको डाउन स्केल कर रहा है 1080p में फिट करने के लिए. इससे होता क्या है? व्हाट हैपेंस विद दिस इज जो आपका एंटी एलियासिंग मेथड्स है उसको ज़्यादा आसानी हो जाती है और जैगेड एजेस आर नॉट जैगेड एनी मोर. Also, even at that 1080p lower resolution, आपको एक higher quality image मिलता है. So, super sampling has been on a lot of graphic cards, a lot of engines for a long time now. लेकिन ये सब बदला DLSS से. So, deep learning super sampling क्या होता है? So, जैसे upscaling में simply higher resolution में render करने के बजाय instead of doing brute force rendering at higher resolution, what DLSS does is it tries to predict using a pre-trained network जो AI से train होता है to predict what a higher quality frame should look like at lower resolution. To simply put, a lower resolution frame is upscaled and it is tried to match to a pre-trained algo. Wow, बहुत मुश्किल हो गया ना. Okay, simplify करते हैं इसको और ज़्यादा. So basically game developer के साथ Nvidia काम करता है. What they do is they run the game at 16K पे काम करते हैं. वो high resolution frames को record करके they run an algo which allows a lower resolution to mimic that higher resolution as much as possible. तो आपका गेम एक्चुअली लो रेजोल्यूशन पे कर रहा है रेंडर, लेकिन इट इज ट्राइंग टू मैच अप टू द हायर रेजोल्यूशन वर्जन्स ऑफ दोस फ्रेम्स. आई थिंक दैट्स मोर सिंपल. आई थिंक सो. आई होप सो. सो दैट वाज द होल थियरी बिहाइंड DLSS 1.0. सो 1.0 में ऐसे होता था अपस्केलिंग. उसके बाद क्या हुआ? प्रॉब्लम. द प्रॉब्लम वाज व्हेन DLSS 1.0 लॉन्च्ड, अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल नोटिस्ड that even though they were getting higher frames, there was a lot of blurriness. बहुत ज़्यादा blur हो जाता था because it is not a static thing. Like when you're playing a game or doing some 3D, moving around a 3D environment, it's not a static thing. One person moves left, one person moves right. Motion vectors भी उसमें involved रहते हैं. So it is not very simple to predict exactly how that jagged edge should be, how smooth it should be. तो वो एक थोड़ा प्रॉब्लम था. इट वॉज नॉट एज डिफाइंड एज इट इज टूडे. नाउ DLSS 2.0 एक्चुअली थोड़ा बदलाव आया है इसमें. नाउ द बदलाव इज कि नॉट एवरी गेम नीड्स टू गेट अ कस्टम मेड एल्गो. एक रेगुलर एल्गो है जो यूनिवर्सल एल्गो विच कैन यूज फ्रेम डेटा एंड जनरेट दैट एल्गोरिदम. दिस एल्गोरिदम इज देन गिवन टू योर ड्राइवर अपडेट. ये आपके ड्राइवर अपडेट में आ जाता है एंड टेल्स योर ग्राफिक कार्ड कि इसको DLSS मोड में कैसे चलाना है. So yes, the performance games are real. A lot of people are seeing कि 4K 60 FPS games में demanding titles में with ray tracing on is now possible. Like control में possible है, cyberpunk में possible अगर आप चला पाओ तो. So that was DLSS. Now keep in mind before we talk about FSR कि AMD के पास ऐसा कुछ competing technology नहीं था. Now this is the second generation of Nvidia's DLSS. अब आ रहा है AMD FSR. So AMD didn't have a competing technology like ray tracing, for example. It has been introduced this generation. So if you want to know more about that, by the way, architectural differences between AMD और Nvidia, हमने एक detailed सा video बनाया है. I know I keep saying this every chance I get, पर आप लोगों वीडियो वैसे भी नहीं देख रहे हो तो देख लो. Thank you. Now talking about FSR, what is FSR? How is it different from AMD? Now AMD के चीफ आर्किटेक्ट भाई साहब ने बोला था
that you don't need machine learning to do it.
But if you take a look at the patent that they have filed, it actually shows कि वो थोड़ा बहुत मशीन लर्निंग के फंडे भी लगा रहे हैं उसमें. It's not that straightforward कि नहीं बिना मशीन लर्निंग के हो रहा है. लेकिन to simply put, what they're doing is they are taking a lower resolution image, उस पे वो दो मैजिक मसाला डाल रहे हैं. So what does FSR do? Now FSR takes your lower resolution image, does edge reconstruction upscaling algorithm, which is a fancy way of saying they smoothen the edges, by the way. Next thing that they do is they apply a sharpening pass to sharpen the overall frame. So इससे उनका upscaling हो रहा है basically. ये बहुत simplified है. अगर आप पेटेंट के अंदर जाओगे उससे ये भी दिख रहा है कि शायद कुछ AI का फंडा लगा रहे हैं ये लोग. मैं वो नहीं करूँगा एक्सप्लेन, काफ़ी कॉम्प्लेक्स है. Let's talk about the actual thing जिससे ये हो रहा है. Now, how is FSR different from DLSS? Now, FSR is not restricted by resolution. You can actually use FSR even at 1080p, at times even 720p resolutions. Now, a lot of people have done a lot of testing. Now, I just want to bring this graph in front of you and talk about one tiny detail. Check out 2070 Super working on Godfall. Before on 4K, this was hardly 40 FPS. It was well below 60 FPS. लेकिन FSR performance mode में, you can see this is well above 60 FPS now. Now imagine that. First of all, this is working on an Nvidia card, which is amazing. Second of all, it's working on a 3-year-old card. So that is what is amazing about FSR. Now how well the adoption goes और कितने गेम ये implement करेंगे और कितना effectively implement होगा, that remains to be seen. I mean, that was the case with DLSS 1.0 as well. But it is super exciting to know कि even पुराने APUs के साथ काम चलने वाला है. You do not need a graphic card to utilize FSR. Now, FSR के obviously drawbacks होंगे. Like the very first DLSS 1.0, where everything was a blurry mess. On lower resolutions, आप देखोगे कि even this is a blurry mess. There's a lot of analysis already out there. Screenshot to screenshot comparison, you can actually see the loss of detail, you can actually see the blurriness. Lekin, now a person who is already living with a 3-year-old graphic card, will he not mind playing at a higher FPS if he's losing some detail here and there? Doesn't that make sense? Also, when you go down to a 1080p kind of a screen and you're playing a fast-paced game, does that kone ka blurriness actually make a difference? So all in all, I would say FSR should work. I hope it gets wider adoption. I hope that we see this on a lot more games, because that is key over here. Just making the technology will not help. DLSS is supported by a wide majority of games. All latest games, all AAA titles actually support DLSS. It remains to be seen if FSR is able to do that. लेकिन मज़ा तो आएगा obviously. पुराने कार्ड पे भी अच्छा FPS आएगा bro. 2070 was probably never a 4K card, but एक नया AAA title Godfall उस पे चल रहा है 60+ FPS में. So that is amazing, even though with so yes, looking forward to more of the same. Also, please like, please share and please subscribe. Please just do it. पूछो मत सवाल, कर लो और शेयर भी कर लो और हमें पुराने वीडियोस देख लो, उसमें बहुत अच्छा काम है. हाँ, थैंक यू फॉर वॉचिंग. Sorry? Fuck you, dude.
Please, bro. Intro. You have to sing.
I have to sing.
You have to sing.
How do you sing? Hello from the... No, fuck off, bro.